Hello.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AOR's first webinar, How COVID-19 Has Impacted Oregon's Material Management Industry. I'll give everybody just a few more minutes, make sure we're all here, and we'll move on to some housekeeping. But first, want to make sure that we thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Rogue Disposal and Recycling. Really appreciate their sponsorship of our very first webinar. Thank you, Rogue Disposal. And here we'll go on to some housekeeping. So let's make sure that if you all should be muted. If you are not muted, please make sure that you are. See. For all of our speakers, I'll just let you know that I will be muting and unmuting you as your time to present comes forward. And so for today, oops, back up here, we just want to let you know that if you have questions, we absolutely want to hear from you during the webinar. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, you should see a little taskbar pop up, and what we want you to use is that Q&A button. Those will come in real time, and we'll be able to monitor your questions, and we will ask that you ask questions of the speakers during their presentation, and at the end we'll go ahead and go through those questions. And also want to let you know that a recording of this webinar will be made available on our website next week, and that just for the sake of time, all of the speaker bios are available on our website, which you can access there through that link. We do have a lot of speakers today. And so here am I. If you can't see me, that's me. I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. I'm Amy Roth. I'm the Resource Director for AOR. And so just wanted to talk a little very bit about how COVID-19 has impacted AOR. As I'm sure you've noticed, we've had to cancel our spring forum, we've canceled our spring on the road, we've had to postpone and relocate our annual conference, but excitingly, we're trying new things like webinars. So the bottom line is that because AOR is funded through memberships and sponsorships in the events that we host, our ability to inform and support and advocate for our members has definitely been impacted since we've had to cancel all of these events. And so wanted to give you some ideas on how you can think about supporting AOR during this time. One of the things you can do is sign up for Recycling 101, which is our online self-paced course. Right now, it's $35 for non-members, and for AOR members, it's $20. There will be information on where you can sign up for that on our website, and I'll send that out to everyone after the webinar. You can also donate your deposit bottles and cans. We are part of the OBRC's Blue Bag program, and so you can send me an email and request a pre-stickered bag and fill with those deposit bottles and cans and drop off at any bottle drop location, and your deposits will be donated to AOR. You can join AOR. There's a lot of benefits to being a member of AOR, so if you or your organization are not already a member, it's a great way to show support for AOR throughout the year, and includes discounts to all of our events, access to our board meetings, and to participate on our committees, and also to just be able to connect with all of our other members. And lastly, after today's webinar, if you found that this was helpful and informative and you feel that you'd like to make a donation, we do have a PayPal donate button on the AOR website. That would be a great way you could just make a small donation to help support our efforts. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward to our first speaker, who is Josh Brown. He's the District Manager for Aero Sanitary Services. And I want to make sure that he is able to present and not muted. Give me just 1 second. Okay, Josh, you should be good to go.
All right, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
All right. Well, thank you, Amy, and the AOR Board of Directors for allowing me the opportunity to speak today to the group. Welcome, everybody. So, today I think I wanted to explain a little bit. A lot of my references are going to be related to Aero Sanitary Services in Portland. We are a hauling company in Portland, which many of you know. So that's my direct oversight. But I may be and at times we'll reference some material relating to our operations within the region. Jim Winterbottom is on the call, and he has helped provide me with some information with our companies out in the Gorge, as well as our operations over in Clark County and Vancouver. And Derek Ranta has provided some of that. So first off, I think the one thing that I wanted to say is I think there's going to be a lot of information that we all present and talk about today that might be challenging or even a bit negative at times. So what I wanted to start off with in this discussion related to our company is some positive things that we've seen come out of COVID-19 instead of only the negative. But we have seen a lot of come out of this pandemic, and I think the one thing that I did want to do on this call is thank all of our frontline team members that are out in the field, at the MRFs, in the landfills, out in trucks, in our maintenance shops, working from home. The frontline team has truly stepped up during this pandemic, and I think a lot of us on this call can speak to that. And I just want to say thank you to all of them. Without them, a lot of us don't have careers or positions in this industry. So, as I said, a lot of our team has really stepped up during this pandemic. And in our company, we've had record high attendance. We've had some of the lowest safety and accident months in history, not only in this region, but throughout the company. And that goes back to that frontline commitment. The morale in our companies throughout the region is very high. We have, a lot of employees out there right now that truly are taking pride in the work that they're doing and proud to be an essential worker. We've talked a lot about the fact that, the garbage and recycling industry is actually providing some normalcy to people's lives right now, being at home. So, another piece of the positive inspiration has been coming from our customers. A lot of our drivers have received thank you notes and gift cards and restaurant cards. We've had a couple of drivers that have received packages that include toilet paper and supplies and things like that. So again, kind of back to that normalcy, it's been very positive and inspiring coming from our customers. We've actually logged a lot of those things on our Facebook page. If you all are inclined to take a look at it, my drivers have been sending us pictures of positive things in the field. So it's called Rolling with Aero if you'd like to check it out. So I was going to dive into a little bit from a hauling perspective, how this pandemic has impacted us and many of us on this call. And I think for all of us, employee safety has been our number one priority, and quite frankly, our biggest concern through this. I'm fortunate to work for a company that took action immediately and began social distancing when this first started coming out. We were able to quite flawlessly transfer our call center and teleport our employees' cell phones to our call system and have them work from home essentially overnight. And there was very, very little visibility of that on the public facing side of things. So I do have to give some credit to our region and corporate teams for being proactive and purchasing laptops and allowing us at the district level to be prepared for that. But not only on the customer service side, the landscape of our operations and our company has changed dramatically over the last couple of months, as it has for many of us. Driver meetings are very different. Obviously, we've social distanced our teams. We're not allowing folks in the building, only for limited access. We've had tremendous discussion around less exposure to waste streams and how they're picking up the trash and recycling. We've done campaigns on the news about bagging garbage and our team safety. There's also been a lot of discussion around bulky items and collection around that. Some companies have made decisions to eliminate the collection of that because of exposure. So it's really challenged and changed the way we operate. And another component of that is customers' locations. Some companies are requiring face coverings or certain PPE that we've had to adapt to that weren't the traditional norm in the past. So, on top of all that, additional cleaning for our facilities, our trucks, it's really changed the way of life in the industry, quite honestly. And one of the toughest things that we've had to overcome is our daily tailgates, which is our daily driver meetings. It's a challenge with less communication, so we've had to find ways to digitally communicate. We've eliminated the use of time clocks, and our employees are clocking in on their phones and so forth. So it's been quite an adaptation to change. The way I put it to our team here at Arrow was that, look, we're all in this together, and it's a completely different culture that we've had to mold to overnight. So, along the business impact lines, other than to our frontline staff, but from a financial standpoint, I think a lot of us on this call are aware that with businesses closing because of the stay-at-home orders, we've all experienced a tremendous loss in commercial revenue. Roll-off and commercial activity is down because of those stay-at-home orders. So that's caused us to have tough discussions with many of our employees and reduced overtime hours and so forth. So it's been a unique time. I am proud to say that in our region, throughout Waste Connections, while some have had to make some sacrifices to hours, we have not laid anybody off. So at the end of the day, we're all still employed, and that's a positive thing. On the flip side, on the hauling component of our business, on the flip side from commercial is residential. And those volumes are way up for obvious reasons. Everybody's home and producing waste and recycling at their house. We've seen a very steep incline in yard debris collection throughout the region. And I think that has a lot to do with people being home and canceling their yard service companies that they've had in the past. This one's probably not a shock to anybody, but glass is very high right now. And I think we all know why, much like my container at home. But I heard an interesting stat the other day that probably explains a lot of this, is that 50% of people working from home are day drinking. So I think that explains the glass boom. That's just a little bit kind of from the hauling standpoint, very high level, of course. And then from the transfer station and MRF perspective, again, I'll be throwing out some numbers that relate to our Clark County operations, as well as out in the gorge. But what we've seen is a 15% decrease in MSW tons year over year, and that's primarily just commercial and construction, which I referred to earlier. However, on the flip side, while the tons are down, we've seen a 15% increase in gate transactions. So for CRC in Vancouver, that's 3,600 total transactions last month. And our transfer stations, and Jim referenced this out in the gorge as well, are just flooded with people. People are not working, they're home, so they're cleaning out their properties. Another component of that is many of the city and municipality spring cleanups have been canceled, which has been driving a lot of traffic to our transfer stations and MRFs. That's despite some efforts that we did as a company to try to limit that traffic for the safety of our employees as well as the safety of the public. We've had tremendous lines at all of them. Related to recycling, commercial recycling, much to what I said before, is down 34%, or roughly 300 tons. But again, on the opposite side, residential recycling is up 12% and right around that 300-ton mark. So it's close to offsetting at the MRF on the recycled tonnages. Similarly, as I've stated out in the gorge, we've seen a tremendous amount of self hauls, a lot of scrap metal, car batteries and used oil being brought in. So that's been a challenge for our facilities to manage the uptick in door traffic and gate traffic from the general public. Obviously people have time to clean out their junk. So, again, I think that's just kind of some very high level analysis and explanation of our impact and how we've been impacted in the region at Waste Connections. I could certainly talk for a lot longer, but I'm going to somewhat wrap it up and be happy to answer any questions. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Great, thanks so much, Josh. Again, just to remind everyone who is participating on the webinar, if you do have questions, you can type those questions in using the Q&A button. Just go ahead and hover your mouse over the top or the bottom of your screen. Not sure where it'll pop up for you. It's sometimes a little different. And you should see the little Q&A and just go ahead and type in any questions you have. I guess, Josh, in terms of, I just have a quick question for you. Overall, how is contamination looking?
Sure. So, I think obviously that varies by area and different programs, but we have seen a little bit of spike in contamination. Obviously, folks, depending on the municipality they live in, are throwing away more at home. So inevitably, at times, that will lead to some increased contamination. So, along the lines at the MRFs, we've been challenged with that increased contamination, especially from a standpoint of social distancing and trying to keep our employees safe and healthy during this. We've had to separate some folks on sort lines and put up shields and things to have some protection. So overall, it's up, and we're trying to mitigate that by enhanced messaging. So.
Sorry, I still had myself on mute. I'm so sorry. We had a few questions come in, and some of our listeners are wondering about recycling markets. Have you seen markets being impacted by COVID? I think that's probably a question that Colin will be able to get to a little bit on a broader scale. But here locally, are you finding that you're needing to store recyclables? Are you able to move things? How is that going?
Sure. So again, I don't personally oversee the MRF, but I did talk to Derek Ranta a little bit, and we haven't seen it yet. And I think some of the other MRF operators on the call can probably allude to this a little further. But fiber pricing is certainly getting a lot more competitive as commercial markets are drying up temporarily. So again, I don't want to speak to something I don't know very well, but at this point, we have not had challenges finding buyers at this point. So.
Oh, okay, that's great. It looks like we have probably time for just about one more question. One, we're getting that people are really excited and happy to hear that you've been able to keep morale high for your workers on the ground during this really crazy time. Do you have any specifics that you would attribute to why that is? Or what best practices, I suppose?
Sure. I think, honestly, I think a lot of it comes back to what I said earlier in my opening, was that a lot of our staff on the front line are very proud to be essential workers. And during a time like this, I think we've realized how critical our services are in a community. And oftentimes, as a lot of us know on this call, we're under-recognized at times comparative to other industries in the country. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think a lot of it as well is the leadership team across the industry in the region. We have a very solid marketplace up here with all of the players in the world, as well as the MRF and hauling side. And I think all of us coming together as an industry is really made our frontline employees proud to be out there and more aware of how critical they really are. That's my world according to Josh answer, I guess.
All right. Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking some time this morning and kicking us off on our webinar. If you continue, if other have questions, Josh will continue to be on the panel here today. We can circle back, but for now, I want to go ahead and move us on to our next set of panelists. We have Sarah Grimm and Gregory Betts, who are with Lane County, and I'm going to go ahead and get them unmuted so they can go ahead and get started on their presentation.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I'm Sarah Grimm. I'm the Waste Reduction Specialist for Lane County. And I'll just start out by recognizing that our community wasn't hit quite as hard as other communities in Oregon, I think. But I'm very impressed with the county's response. Right away, they took action to help all employees take care of themselves and the work to be done. They started daily communications with all staff via email, and they quickly put in place several broad-based policy adjustments for sick leave so that it would make absences less damaging to people individually and the divisions at work. And mostly the county's ability to mobilize a remote working capability for 900 individuals within 1 week's time. They started from ground zero, and there had been no acceptable standard around teleworking, but now there is. I was really impressed with that. In the waste management division specifically, all our core functions have continued pretty much uninterrupted, except for we had some hazardous waste roundups in the rural areas that we had to cancel, and the master recycler class that was to start April 1st was canceled as well. The vast majority of our 100 or so staff are essential workers, and they're showing up to work for the most part to staff 15 transfer stations and the Short Mountain landfill operations. Next slide, I think, Amy. There we go. There we go. You could, good enough. So the vast majority of our 100 or so staff are essential workers. I said that. Really only a handful of the Waste Management Division folks are working at home like myself because we're not essential to the operations. But I would like to invite Greg Betts, our operations supervisor, to describe how things are going on the ground and what's been adjusted. Greg?
Yes, hi. So one thing we did for our employees, besides give them thanks and appreciation for them showing up doing their work, is that after one of our staff meetings, we want to do something a little special. We ended up ordering Lane County logoed hats with American flag on the side. And on the back of the hat, we came up with, it says Waste Management Essential 2020. So we've been handing these out, and people have been having fun with that and taking pride in that. Social distancing is the biggest element for transfer. We used to have a large daily group meeting with our operators before we get started to give out assignments, but now we have several operators report to their trucks directly, checking in with supervisors for assignments. This allows us appropriate space in our meeting room. Distancing requirements complicate our driver training program. Transferring trucks for off-site repair is also a challenge. We have been leaving a shuttle vehicle behind just to kind of trade out so we don't have two people in the same vehicle at the same time. We really can't train operators on new equipment without violating physical distancing guidelines. We've kind of put that on the back shelf for now. As you see, the slide before, if you could go back one, Amy. Yeah, this shows a Saturday, April 4th. We've been very busy. This is mid-afternoon, our busiest time. We had like a 45-minute wait for people to get in and through the site. They're lined up everywhere. Our count is up about 25% at most of our 15 sites. And as Josh said before, people are at home. They're busy cleaning up their yards and garages, and a lot of people are just don't have anything else to do but tidy things up. At our main transfer site entrance, we have posted signage stating that we are now open on Sundays, and a sign is put up when lines get long, warning of the approximate wait time. We are also pre-screening loads before people come in, so that having the interaction with customers before they weigh in to get them across the scales quicker. Okay, that was a Saturday, so the next slide shows a Sunday. If you could move to the next slide. So here, obviously, traffic's a lot less, and that's why we've been kind of advertising out a little harder this year than other years, our seasonal change of our summer hours of being opening on Sunday. Next slide. This is our recycle area. We have posted distancing signs around the site for both customers and employees to remind them to do so. Our feed collection supervisors got their quilting group together to make masks to have available for staff who choose to wear them. Next slide.
Oh.
Okay, this is our hazardous waste collection facility. We added signage asking people to stay in their vehicle, and they're popping their trunks or opening up the doors, and then we're unloading and maintaining a safe 6-foot distance. Next slide. So at the feed booth, Mike Armstrong, our maintenance hero, mounted plexiglass guards with Velcro so they are easily adjustable by staff to suit their needs. This created a barrier, makes our employees feel safer, and also the public. So that was a great addition to our booth at short notice. And then the next slide. So also you can see this, in order to prevent flying droplets infecting our receptionist area, Mike mounted this plexiglass. He also mounted similar plexiglass in one of our feed booths that houses 2 feed collectors, but the results did not make them feel safe. So a workaround was devised through staff working the line to pre-check loads and keep it moving at a pace. We actually put a side-by-side four-wheeler out there for them to sit in and kind of stay out of the rain and the weather, and then they're greeting customers as they come in, and like I said, pre-screening loads. All right, next slide, and back to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks. So on the waste team side, well, as mentioned, we did have to cancel master class potlucks for the foreseeable future, and we have to announce the closure of our plastics collection. But I'm sorry, my screen is saying that my Wi-Fi is spotty, so if I blank out, Greg can finish talking. We greatly felt a value in our social media activity that our newest employee, Angie, started going with recently, and it's been a great way to connect with our partners and learn what's going on with MECA, the Materials Exchange Center for Community Arts, with St. Vincent de Paul, all the traditional ways that our community can do other recycling and reuse. It really helped to have that connection with the community. So next slide, Amy. So as I said, our community collection of recycling was closed pretty rapidly. We did give our 150 community collectors a chance to bring in their existing loads by the end of March, but we asked them not to do collections for fear of distance problems. We initially reached out right away to all our contractors to check in and touch base. St. Vincent de Paul, we depend on them greatly for many different recycling options. They ended their collections on our Glenwood facility site of styrofoam and reusables right away and temporarily stopped the mattress and appliance recycling that they do for us. However, we're accumulating for them and we anticipate starting back up as soon as they can. Our scrap metal dealer did check in, and they've slashed the price that they'll pay us for scrap metal, saying that it's due to illnesses and closures at end markets. Other than that, I can't think of any markets that we've had. The glass market had already gone to zero for us. The phone calls, the community was rather stressed, and we got lots of phone calls, frantic, that folks would have to throw away valuable recyclables. I got especially a lot of calls about donations to the thrift stores, St. Vincent's and Goodwill, etc. Encouraging them to just hang on to it for a little while. A lot of folks were also very distraught over the closing of the bottle drop system, the return centers. I think they heard news of Eastern Oregon closures or that the grocery stores had closed, because I visited bottle drop centers on behalf of others, in fact. And while the lines were very long and the parking lot was a little bit of a zoo, it was still open. Let's see. We've checked in with most of the community center related recycling activities, such as garden services and thrift stores and tool sharing programs. They took a temporary hiatus, and they are now, most of them are starting to announce plans to expand and open up by appointment and things like that. Our advertisers that I have monthly schedules with, they were quick to get in touch so that we could adjust the advertising to ensure we're not advertising for something that's currently closed. So as we hopefully move towards post-COVID crisis era, we anticipate settling into a new normal to operate our businesses and our recycling communities in staying safe, but still doing it. I think that's it for now. Thanks, Amy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah and Greg. I do have a couple of questions, but we just have a really short window of time. But Greg, could you say a little bit more about what type of pre-screening at the transfer station you're doing? What exactly are you guys looking for?
Just kind of observing the load, checking out the load, looking for, you can't have, screening for prohibited items, propane tanks, and just kind of having that discussion with the customer and making sure they don't have any asbestos or anything else, so that when they get up to, then they were radioing to the scale attendant so that when they pulled up, they knew exactly what to charge them for fee base, and then got them right in.
Okay, great. And quickly, Sarah, just in terms of, volumes and rates, has Lane County, in terms of, are you seeing like a drop in revenue? Are you seeing more contamination coming from residential or multifamily? How are things on that end being impacted, and what might Lake County be looking at in terms of, will you be having to maybe restructure contracts or those sorts of things looking down the line?
Well, our restructuring of contracts would occur based on the contractor, and like I said, the scrap metal needed to restructure our contract with them. Overall, we are tracking our load count and our tonnage. Certainly, commercial loads are down from commercial entities, definitely, but we're not too worried because our gate is just overwhelmed. As I believe Greg said, we're at 25% increase in people visiting our site. So I haven't heard anybody acting very worried about our budget in terms of this, but certainly since we operate on a very careful level, we will be tracking that more. We had been scheduled to do a rate increase for landfill tip fee. we're set on a CPI increase annually. And that was to be implemented July 1. That has been postponed until a future time, possibly in the fall, but more likely next year. That's about all I know. Certainly people can contact me and I'd be happy to get more detailed information for them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sarah and Greg. And so now we're going to move on to Molly Vogt and Joel Sermon with Metro. And so they're going to take over screen sharing and they have their presentation to share with you. Let's see here. Molly, you look good to go.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Joel is actually going to do the screen share the whole time rather than us trying to hand it off midway. So I think he's taking that, but I'll introduce ourselves. I am the analytics manager in Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department, and Joel, our senior analyst and forecaster. My expertise is in information systems and analysis, and our team provides a variety of services to the whole department involving modeling, forecasting, analysis, research, so we just wanted to highlight a couple of the things that have been going on behind the scenes at Metro. Waiting for the screen share. I'm going to see, I know we have a slide.
It looks like I'm not able to share my screen. It says I can't start screen share while other participant is sharing.
Okay. Amy, any thoughts on that?
Yep, working on it right now.
Cool. Great. I can keep talking into a little bit of the slides. One of the themes that we're presenting on is just our response kind of in terms of providing information about what was happening in the system. And so Joel's going to show some of the data that we've been able to generate and analyze recently since COVID and since the stay-at-home order. And I'll talk more about how we were able to get that data, the changes that we've had in the background to bring data in more quickly and frequently and be able to analyze that for decision-making rapidly. Obviously, a lot of the themes that we've heard today already are about the kind of quick response that was needed when things were happening. And what we've done is try to mobilize in information system sense.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen now.
Looks good.
Great. So I'm just going to present a few pictures of regional garbage data over the last several weeks. Happening the tonnage since social distancing and stay-at-home measures have gone into effect. I'll then zoom out and talk a little bit about long-run tonnage trends to put this all into context and also what might be in store over the next few years. So in terms of trends, this picture shows weekly tons of garbage delivered to 11 of the largest solid waste facilities in the metro region. So that's deliveries to Metro's 2 transfer stations plus 9 private facilities. All total, these facilities take in about 95% of the region's garbage. So we're working with a pretty good sample here. I should also say that garbage here means both wet and dry sources. So, you know, your typical household and business waste on the wet side plus C&D, bulky waste, et cetera, on the dry side. What we can see here is that since the governor's stay-at-home order, and actually a bit before, as organizations started to voluntarily lock down before the order, regional garbage has been in decline. You're looking at year-over-year percentage changes in tonnage for each week. So it compares the current week with the exact same week the previous year. Zooming in specifically the last 7 weeks since the governor's order, so that's March 21st through May 8th of this year, and comparing that to the same 7 weeks from 2019, which happens to be March 23rd through May 8th. There's no doubt tonnage is down almost 19,000 tons or about 10%. The good news, or the bad news, depending on your point of view, is that these declines appear to be slowing down. The week before, for example, tonnage was down 11%. Now we've slowed to 10%. Now there are differences by stream. So wet is down less than dry, as well as by facility. Some facilities are down a lot, some are only down a little. We've all been hearing that residential, so single and multifamily residential garbage is way up and business is way down. While we actually don't have good current data on this yet, just looking at source separated residential food waste coming into Metro's transfer stations, it is up a whopping 35% over the year, which suggests a similar situation for residential trash. So if residential garbage is up this much and the region as a whole is down, it really does suggest that business garbage must have plummeted, or maybe turned off is the phrasing to use here. So this is pretty remarkable stuff happening over the last 8 weeks in terms of regional tonnage decline. Before I pass it back over to Molly, I do want to put these declines in context. This is a picture of regional garbage tons from January 1988 through December 2019, along with the dates of US recessions as gray bars. So during what were relatively mild recessionary periods in 1990, 1991, and then again in 2000, 2001, peak to trough tonnage declines were about 10.5% over 2 years in the first recession there, and then much slower in the second by about 5% over 2 years. But then during the Great Recession, garbage fell much faster and for a longer duration, declining by 23% peak to trough over 5 years. So if that 10 to 11% annual decline we've been seeing recently holds up, 2020 should see a drop to just under about 1.3 million regional tons. This is obviously a big if, and it'll depend on the depth and duration of our current recession. Many economists think the economy should begin to grow again later this year and to reach pre-recession peaks by 2022, which for tonnage might look something like this. However, some economists think that at least after the initial rebound, there may be so much systemic damage to the economy that full recovery doesn't happen until 2025. Metro publishes a solid waste forecast each year around November. The forecast we just completed in November 2019 is obviously null and void, but we did publish a revision earlier last month, and we'll likely revise it again next month as more data rolls in and the shape of the recovery comes into focus. And with that, I will turn it back over to Molly.
Great, thank you, Joel. I just wanted to make a couple comments about how Joel was able to present and get his hands on some of the data that he was just sharing with you all, and this lens into what's happening in the system in terms of the tonnage changes just in the last 8 weeks or so wouldn't have been possible without a lot of cooperation and great ideas, brainstorming, and help from folks at Metro and outside of Metro. Joel, can you advance the slide? We had initially, and on a kind of regular basis, we had a 45-day lag at most, but up to a 45-day lag between tonnage transactions happening and when we would see them through the reporting system that was in place. So transactions that happened at transfer stations, et cetera, at the beginning of the month would be reported at the end of the month, and then there was a 15-day lag before they were finalized. So that was a very long period of time between when the tonnage was actually being transferred and when we were able to understand those trends and those numbers. So when COVID hit and we had the stay-at-home order, and there were many immediate concerns about what was going to happen with tonnage and how that would affect revenue and how that would affect potential layoffs at Metro, there was an immediate need to understand more about what's happening in the system more quickly and ideally more frequently. So what we were able to mobilize was a system that maintains the old monthly reporting, but added onto it, we worked hard to minimize the additional effort, but go ahead and add in the next bars, thanks. We added on weekly reporting for those facilities that Joel described. There's 9 facilities around the region in addition to the 2 Metro transfer stations that we have this more frequent data from. And we are getting tonnage information at a course level, but on a weekly basis. from those transfer stations, so that each week, and Joel, click to the next animation, each week they report the tons for the previous week within 4 days of the close of that week. And then we can see that information and use it to understand trends much more immediately as they may be shifting on us, to look behind, but also to understand what the nature of the trend is and whether it's slowing, as Joel had suggested in the data that he's seeing now, or advancing, or what it might be doing in general moving forward. So again, the overall change in our system was to add a layer of data. We look forward to being able to simplify and streamline and minimize effort further, but to do something very quickly, we just had to add a data flow. Advanced slide. So what it took, and you can just go ahead and step through all these. There's, thank you, Joel. We had 9 facilities sending us weekly data summaries, 8 Metro staff building a system to receive that data and import it into some tools, including a visualization tool that we could use to share internally and understand what was happening, designing and building that information system, which was a relatively new thing for us. 4 different departments. It was a multi-department effort that we're supporting this use of our time out of the blue. It was not something we expected to be spending a lot of time on then. And so we had to shift priorities quickly and get a lot of cooperation across the agency. And we used Microsoft Power BI for a dashboard internally to, again, be able to visualize and understand what's happening with the data and share that among ourselves. And there were truly countless phone calls, virtual meetings, and emails happening. All of this was done remotely. And again, with a team that hadn't all worked together before through different departments. So it was a really interesting process. We had a lot of cooperation, a lot of patience was required. But I, again, want to call out and thank the facilities who are sending us this weekly data. We did our best to minimize the impact that it would have on them, because we know their time is precious and short as well. We tried to simplify that weekly data request. And thanks to their cooperation and help with all of this, we're able to get the data on a weekly basis that we're now being able to analyze in the way that Joel just shared. We're also working, again, long-term on trying to simplify it, to minimize the impact on folks who are doing this reporting, and also a way to share it out beyond Metro. So that's kind of what the future holds. Beyond that, if Joel has additional thoughts or you have questions, we can take them as time permits.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much. Let me get back to our screen over here. You guys should see the Molly and Joel's faces here. I sure hope that's what you all are seeing. So Molly and Joel, in terms of the materials mix coming in, are you seeing, what kind of changes are you seeing?
I'm deferring to Joel on the specifics of the data and materials.
Yeah, in terms of the mix of materials, so I guess the sectoral mix we're seeing at our own transfer stations is that we're seeing a big increase in the residential food waste, as I mentioned, and an even bigger drop in the commercial. So a lot more residential food waste, a lot less commercial food waste. When it comes to the garbage, the MSW, we don't track the sector. When the truck comes over our scale, we kind of know what kind of truck it is, and we can make some assumptions about whether it's coming from a commercial or residential source, but we don't know for sure. So we will start to see our first little bit of data once haulers start reporting, do the normal jurisdictional reporting, and then we can see how the MSW mix on the sector is changing, but we don't have very good data on that.
Okay, great. I think we have the screen sharing thing fixed. Sorry for the confusion and mix up there. I think it looks like it's probably, Can you talk to any of the safety precautions that Metro is taking at the facilities for your workers?
We discussed a little bit about possibly sharing that, but we didn't prepare for it, and I'm not one who's on the ground in that way, so I'm a little awkward in trying to update on that. Joel, I don't know if you have any insight that you're up to sharing.
I know that just based on hearing, Tom Chamoff, our director of operations, he's presented a lot on the various safety precautions they're taking. I know they're numerous. I don't know the nature, the detail on those, so I will pass on getting into detail, but I know we are taking additional precautions.
And I can say, again, on the information systems side of things, there's been a lot of work also in tracking, inventorying, and in a certain sense, forecasting the PPE that's needed across all of Metro, but for our transfer stations included. And so just again, having access to information that's accurate about what our inventories are and what we will need, and making sure we're supplied well for safety is key. And we've mobilized that fairly quickly as well. We've in general been able to leverage existing work because we were already heading in these directions. We've just turbo speeded a lot of that. So it's been pretty impressive to see that happen.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information that the two of you were able to share. And for now, we're going to go ahead and bring it up to Liz, who we're going to move into some of the impacts that we have been seeing at the reuse industry. So Liz, let me get you started here. It looks like you're good to go.
All right. Hi, everyone. So it has been an interesting journey for us, as I'm sure with all of you in your various industries. If you've been to Scrap or any creative reuse center, you know it's a very tactile place, which you just have to get in there and dig and treasure hunt. And really with all these restrictions and need for sanitation, that is just not doable. So we've been facing a lot of challenges. Our board voted in late March to close our facilities and lay staff off temporarily. But we've had a lot of staff who, have been volunteering to still do stuff just to keep Scrap going. And we do have 6 locations across the country. So it's been a real challenge to keep up with each of the state requirements. So for example, Richmond, Virginia is open and allowing folks in, but we're still implementing the strictest protocols that we have for sanitation and limiting the number of people in the stores there. However, in Portland, we have just such a big space and limited capacity for staffing that it doesn't make sense to open at this time. And, even after Multnomah County opens, I don't know of a timeline that we will be open to the public. So sanitation is a huge challenge. Of course, the well-being and safety of our staff and volunteers and customers. It's difficult to be in Scrap with a lot of people. We can have up to 50 people in the store at any given time shopping and working and volunteering. So that has had to halt for now. So, before we paused operations, we did have a sanitation schedule in process, cleaning every hour, cleaning surfaces, all of those things that, we'll be implementing. We do have limited staff that has come back. We were able to get the payroll protection plan, which is a blessing and a curse. Understandably, and I'm sure a lot of your businesses are dealing with this, folks aren't ready to come back to work. I mean, there's a lot of things that are causing people worry with safety and sanitation, which I can totally understand. So we're just trying to pivot as we can to make things work. Another thing is we're so dependent on volunteers to help us do our sorting and making materials accessible. However, we can't guarantee the safety of our volunteers, so it doesn't make sense to have volunteers. We have had a few longtime volunteers that we've given kits to make, put products together at home. And another, a couple other challenges that, is we have such a variety of materials. So, it's not that, we've started an online store, which I'll talk about shortly, but the quantity, quality, and variety of materials makes it so difficult to have any uniform selling or make anything uniform on our selling platforms. And probably the biggest question that I'm getting in email is when we'll start taking donations. And based on what I've seen from creative reuse centers across the country, that is our biggest challenge, not having control over those materials that are coming in. We can't just take everything that someone brings us. So we do sort through donations in normal times, and we make sure that it's items that we can accept, that we don't have too much of. So we won't be able to do that and really, dig through a donation that someone brings us. So we're working on what that would look like, whether it's requiring folks to quarantine for a certain number of days ahead of time, and that we quarantine the donations for 3 to 5 days on our end, and just, making sure that folks are really organizing their donations as well. So that's something that's top of mind too, because really, those material donations are what keeps us going. So, we've been facing a lot of challenges, but at the same time, it's been really great to see the community support that we have. It's great that folks are donating, to help fund scrap operations, purchasing items through our online store. We've found that we've had to make a lot of kits for people to make it easier to shop. We've been able to do some of our products like small containers, corks, bottle caps, things like that by the handful, that we've been able to offer on our online store. We're also trying to offer virtual shopping for folks so they can get connected with a 20-minute Zoom call. That way they can virtually experience shopping at Scrap and select what they want, and then we offer curbside pickup. So that's what we're offering now, and really just trying to stay in touch with other creative reuse centers across the country to see how they're handling it and how they're impacted as well. So it's a real challenge, and it's going to be interesting, to see how, it changes the structure of our nonprofit and how we operate, and really the creative reuse movement. And I think, not to speak for all reuse organizations, but I think reuse organizations as a whole, because we are so tactile.
Okay, Liz, we have a couple of questions for you looking ahead. When do you anticipate that how do you anticipate when the stores you do start having customers in? What do you think that's going to look like? And I have a second part of that question, so I'll let you answer that first.
Okay. I think what we would do is work with the staff to come up with the best solution. We would probably, the first phase would be appointment shopping. And that one's a challenge too, because it is so important for us to be accessible to the community, but we also have to balance that with, our needs as a nonprofit and our staff needs, and also the needs of our community. So we're trying to work through that, but that would probably be the first phase. And then when we do open to the public is, really restricting the number of folks on site. Obviously the social distancing measures. We have some folks who are working on, the plexi shields like Lane County has, and really just, having folks wash their hands right when they come in and wear gloves, before they start digging in things, and really probably limiting the time that folks can spend on site as well.
Okay, that sounds great. So in thinking about, obviously you are a donation-based organization. Do you anticipate any changes to what donations you will perhaps take in the future, or what that process will look like? And when you're looking at your volunteers to bringing them back in, are you anticipating any other changes to what that process might look like as well?
Definitely. So as far as donations goes at this time, I don't see the types of materials that we accept changing. And obviously, as we all know, research is changing constantly. There's an article that, cloth cannot, won't hold the coronavirus or COVID-19, but then it'll stay on plastic and metals a certain amount of time. So I don't anticipate that we'll change what we accept. The only thing that would change what we accept is if we get too much of a quantity of an item, or just like the recycling markets, we aren't able to sell certain items that we have in an abundance. And then the second part of the question, the volunteers, that's a really good one. I think, really right now we're not open to the public, but we do have staff working on site, and one of our staff members brought up a good point of, really making sure we're limiting who's on site and, really having control of who's entering our facility. And, the plan is to really track, so who's coming on site when, so we have contact tracing if anything were to happen. Also having folks certify when they come in that they're not experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. And so I think, we'll be doing that with staff, but then also anyone who volunteers. So I do see that there's going to be huge changes to how we operate our volunteer program. We have volunteer groups that come in, and just from a space constraint lens, it's going to be a challenge to keep folks, to allow folks that social distancing to work on projects. So we'll also probably have to limit the number of volunteers we can have at a time.
Excellent. I have one other question, Liz, and then we're going to have to move on. But is there any role for local government or perhaps other community partners, private or public, to help assist with some of that donation management? Do reuse stores potentially need a larger storage space to be able to process and maybe quarantine materials so you can ensure social distancing?
I think that's an excellent question. At this time for scrap, we had, really great staff members who were for the most part, organizing donations. So yes, we could use the space if we get such an influx of materials. But at the same time, what we really try and do is balance the amount of materials that we can take because, we're very limited in output right now. So for us, it's balancing that. I think that how local governments and organizations can help nonprofit reuse centers of all sorts, is, funding streams, of course, really looking at the spaces that they're in, if it comes down to it, depending on how things shake out, if scrap has to relocate, for any reason, having assistance with relocation, those kind of things. So I think there's just, a lot of broader questions than that, and I think I over-answered that question.
I think you did just fine. Thank you, Liz, so much for sharing your experience about what's happening with scrap and in the reuse industry. And we're going to continue the discussion about reuse and move on to Daniel Bartholomew, who is the Executive Director over at Free Geek. Daniel, you should be ready to go.
Thanks, Amy. And thanks to the AOR board for having this forum and for everybody that's joined. Free Geek has been in a growth mode over the last 9 weeks. We started out, we did a voluntary furlough. We still kept benefits for everyone that did furlough, and they're gonna furlough through June. But our business hit pretty hard in March, but then we quickly pivoted. We closed our store, we closed to the public, and we moved everything online. But Free Geek does more than just refurbish computers and put them out at low or no cost. We do a lot of trainings, and we do a lot of digital basics for folks that have never been on a computer before. So we had to pivot not just our store, but we had to pivot our education. And to do that, we started coming up with infographics and comics that we could send out with computers so that those that have never been digitally connected before could be able to stand up their laptop and get it connected into the intranet. So that's been a big effort that we've been doing over the last 9 weeks is getting those things together. But within Free Geek, what we did was we are now operating as a skeleton crew. We do have daily huddles. We do a thorough sanitization of the facility every 4 hours. But our demand is up. Our demand is huge, as I guess folks could probably imagine, with everybody telecommuting, teleschooling, and telehealthing. Our demand is up 3,000% year over year. A great example of some of the things that we're doing would be, we were contacted by the nonprofit organization that handles the foster kids in Oregon. And they, of course, are not connected. They don't have devices. So we worked with them to come up with a program where we could get devices out to all of the children that require them so that they could stay in touch with their biological families and do teleschooling. So we've been working on that program with them for the last couple of weeks, and it's going very well. Our biggest issue right now is donations, technology. Everybody has kind of huddled down and grabbed their laptops out of their closets and are now working with them. So they're not bringing them the free geek anymore. So we've developed a program with Intel and First Tech where we are doing, we call it Technology Now, and we are doing drop-off sites at a number of different facilities, about 8 different facilities around Portland metro area, where we're setting up for drop-off and a very safety conscious drop-off with social distancing and sanitization of the material that we receive. We also take care of that material when it comes into Free Geek. We set it aside for 3 days and then we start working on it. It's been a big change for us, but we've been able to do it. We also are working with the city of Portland. We're coming up with a program with them where we can take new in-box laptops, get them distributed out to those who need it through nonprofits. And then we will supply all the tech support and all the training that's associated with those devices. The community in general has really come to help us out during this time. Green Century, who you would probably think of as a competition for a Free Geek, it's actually run by an ex-Free Geeker. And he has been coming over about once a week in the evening and bringing us material that he has that we work with him on during the week. And he's been bringing us material so that we can refurbish it and get it out to the community that needs it. So it's been a big change for us, but it's been going very well. Everybody that can work from home is working from home at Free Geek. And those that are essential, we're supplying all the food that they need. We've increased their pay so that they're able to see their way through this crisis.
Okay, that's great. Daniel, do you have any suggestions if there's anyone out there how they can maybe help and bring some materials, get some equipment into your hands that you want to share?
Yes, please. If you have anything in your closet, as many of us do, please package that up, bring with the battery and with the charger. If you could bring it to Free Geek, we are open by appointment right now, and that's up on our website. Or you can go to one of the TechNow drop-off sites, which are throughout the Portland metro area. And the schedule for those and where they are is all up on our website.
Okay, great. And that's freegeek.org for those who were wondering. So that's great. Thanks, Daniel. We'll be moving along here to Joel Jennings from OBRC. And Joel, I think you should be good to go.
All right. Thank you, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I'll jump right in. The central issue for OBRC and bottle drop during the pandemic has been an increased demand for our services mixed with the demand to provide safety for our customers, our staff, and neighboring communities. So it's been a bit of a challenge. There's been, I think, it's been critical for us to be able to provide what we consider an essential service while adapting to the changes that have been demanded of us. The main drivers, of course, as everybody knows, is social distancing. So requirements that our redemption centers were not immediately set up for. And then if you're not familiar, OLCC on March 15th suspended return to retail. That essentially meant that every retail store in the state would not be subject to OLCC enforcement if they chose to stop accepting returns. And the overwhelming majority of them did just that, leaving bottle drop redemption centers as the only site of return, or the lifeline, as we've been calling it, to bottle refunds statewide. Our response to this was to really focus on access as much as we could. So we jumped in right away and implemented social distancing and PPE best practices. We limited the number of people in our redemption centers. We limited use of the return machines to every other machine. We provided PPE for staff. We provided hazard pay for staff. With stores stopping accepting returns, that also freed up a large capacity of OBRC staff. So we normally have drivers running trucks all over the state to collect returns, but if those drivers were no longer needed, so we were able to redirect and support our redemption centers. We were also able to open a emergency return location to provide some additional access. We partnered with some community groups. One got a little bit of media, the People's Depot, which is doing sort of a on-the-ground collection service to really try and keep access to returns open. But the result of those competing forces, social distancing and limited returns to stores, has put immense pressure on our bottle drop locations. So conditions right now, as a prior presenter mentioned, there's long lines and there's a lot of people at our locations who have limited access to other services, who are experiencing homelessness or a variety of other challenges in their lives. And there's a lot of concentration of that at our redemption center now, and that's been a huge challenge. Other effects have been similar to the sort of metro trend lines. We saw a pretty dramatic drop in return rates the first couple weeks, starting even before the stay-at-home order, but then dropping off even further. But those have also started to rebound. We're seeing people especially come to the Green Bag program. Our normal Green Bag sign-up rate for the last few years has been between 200 or 300 a day. That's been successful. We've had 100,000 signups a year for the last 2 years. I checked some data just the other day. We had 1,200 signups on one day, and we've been consistently signing up about 800 to 1,000 people a day. And those people are converting at about an 85% rate within 1 week, which means they're dropping off bags in their first week. And that's driving a lot of business for us. That's a great option. It's safe. You can do it socially distant. So we're encouraging that, but it's been a challenge to adapt to that as well. What's next? We're shifting gears again as we speak. So with much thanks actually to AOR, one thing that we've been doing throughout has been staying in steady contact with both the OLCC and the governor's office, and AOR's legislative support on that has been critical in those conversations. AOR wrote some letters, and Chris Parda supported us on that and helped us keep those channels of communication open. And I think as a result of that, that's part of why we were able to ensure that return to retail would be included in the phase 1 reopening. So as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, 31 counties have entered phase 1. What you may not know is that as part of phase 1, return to retail for bottle returns will come back on May 29th, or officially it comes back 2 weeks after a county enters phase 1. So for those 31 counties, May 29th, retail begins. So we are actively now, we being OBRC in this case, are actively now out supporting our retailers. One thing we were doing over the last few weeks was making sure reverse vending machines were remaining properly maintained and ready to return. But I think we're going to see some stress as they prepare and respond to what we think is a pretty big pent-up demand out there in a lot of the state that have had very limited access. speculation at this point on what might happen in terms of our overall return rate, which has been very strong the last couple of years. A little too early to know for sure, but we think that COVID may effect on that, negative. Some that, as I said, and so again, it's really going to be to see what happens as return mail opens back. Return rates bounce with the summer season, which for us officially starts next week after the holiday. I think the only thing closing, I'd just say that we're proud to say that we've sort of survived this, and with a ton of credit to our staff, and many of whom work with the public every day. We think the system is healthy, though there's been a lot of challenges, and we've been working through those. We've been really happy to be able to invest in access to the system during this. And another thing which I thought was really interesting, noting back to an earlier presenter, is one lesson that we've learned from this is that the Bottle Drop brand, which we at OBRC think of as our redemption centers, has become pretty synonymous with the bottle bill and bottle return statewide. We saw a lot of confusion as stores closed, online, social media comments, letters to the editor, even things were saying, is Bottle Drop open? And oftentimes they were referring to their local grocery store, which is not officially a Bottle Drop. It's a bottle return location. So it's a good news, bad news situation there. We're happy that people identify us with the system, but we have been working to clarify that bottle drops have remained open throughout, though return to retail was closed, but now we'll be coming back. And I expect we'll see a lot of activity like that again once return to retail opens in the Portland metro area. I'll end there and take any questions now, or if I've used my time, I'm happy to answer questions offline or at the end of the webinar as well.
I think we're okay, Joel. There are several questions that have come in for you. One, looking at some of the challenges that the Bottle Drop location at the North Hayden Island was experiencing, can you go into a little bit about what were some of the changes that ultimately OBRC did, and were there other locations that you had to address some of these other issues with as well?
Sure. There's a lot of he said, she said around Delta Park. From our perspective, things there were pretty stable when a lot of that conversation sort of blew up in the media. And we felt like TMT or the property management's security there was pretty heavy-handed and escalated some situations that otherwise we feel like we would have been able to handle. So I'll try and be as brief about this as I can. Right now, things are stable. We feel like we're in a relatively stable situation out there. We are looking forward to sort of return to retail to come back to take some pressure off. But essentially, we had implemented, if you look at my slide, that left-hand picture with those 6-foot markers, we had those in place. We had lines painted on the ground. We had extra staff out managing. I think there's a lot of confusion about social distancing, and you see this at other locations where, you know, if a family group or a cohabitating group is standing in line together, it's very easy to confuse that as though we weren't enforcing social distancing. And what a cohabitating group looks like in an unhoused community might be very different from what most of us would perceive as a cohabitating community at the grocery store. So I think there was a lot of misperception about what was happening out there and what was appropriate social distancing and what was not. We were very active, and we had no police reports. We had no elevated concerns over what is relatively normal activity at that location during the summer season. For us at Delta Park, this was like a very busy summer day with the implementation of social distancing, and we felt like we were managing it. At Delta Park, landlords were unhappy with our lines leaking out into the parking lot, and escalated the situation from there. right now, as I mentioned, I think we're stable. We're working with them to manage the lines, and I think we'll be all right going forward.
Okay, great. One other quick question related to, you mentioned about the green bags. What about blue bags? Are you seeing sort of a similar increase, given that so many nonprofits, AOR included, utilizes these to help as a fundraising mechanism for them, for their organizations? Have you seen an uptick in the use of the blue bags during this time?
Thanks for that question. There's been some interesting stuff happening with blue bags. So we have seen a minor uptick generally, and we've also seen a slight uptick because we ran a matching program. So we ran a $25,000 match for the Oregon Food Bank, which ended up raising $75,000 in customer donations, and we accepted those through a few different channels, which was fantastic. We delivered a $100,000 check to the Oregon Food Bank. And that's still ongoing. Generally speaking, we have seen some of our blue bag donation accounts out there, promoting blue bags right now as an opportunity to donate, and we're seeing a slight increase in people using that program, which is great.
Excellent. Well, Joel, there are a couple of other questions over in the Q&A panel, but just due to time, I think for right now, we need to move on to our next speaker. But if you have a moment and like to try take a look at those and give some answers to folks, that would be fantastic. So thanks, Joel, appreciate that. And now we're gonna move on to Pierce Lewis, who is with Dirt Hugger. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And thanks to AOR and Amy for hosting this and having us here. It's pretty interesting to hear all these perspectives on the solid waste community and what's happening. So organics has been pretty interesting. Overall, positive stuff. So we've stayed open throughout the entire pandemic. On the product side, we are at 154% of our forecast. That was already kind of forecast to increase over last year. And then on the tipping side, we're at 136% of our forecast. And again, that was set to bump anyway. So if you compare it year over year from last year, it's even higher than those two numbers. When you get into the resolution, we're an overflow facility for Portland, and then we're the primary processor for Vancouver. And from Portland, we were taking overflow of about 50 tons a day of commercial food waste. And that disappeared overnight. So it was 50 tons a day for a few months and then 0 tons. That was an interesting part of the mix, coinciding with the stay-at-home orders. And then on the residential side, we've seen, that uptick as well, up to the point where now we're going to start throttling down some of the overflow material that we're taking from Portland so that we can make sure we've got our capacity we need for Vancouver and other guaranteed feedstock tonnages that are coming in. So the resi is definitely up. So that's kind of background on product tipping and numbers. In terms of changes on site, we've made really early on, we kind of dove in and our whole staff got really engaged and really interested in it. And it was every morning and every afternoon, we'd be circling up and figuring out what to do and what changes came out and what new guidances were out. And I'd say those first 2-3 weeks, there were just a ton of changes and we were trying to react and do as well as we could. And we're pretty excited that I would say 85% of the changes we've made, we will probably not go back on. So right out of the gate, we knew that the truckers coming in, bringing tipping material, they were coming sort of from out of county, out of area. We were concerned about the contact with them. So we put up plexiglass windows. We put a new change for us was we put CB radios in all of our loaders. So the truckers used to come in and spend some time with our front desk and talk to them and sort of, they've been in a truck for 90 minutes. So they also like to chit chat and then give tickets and hand them back and forth. And we sort of eliminate all of that. The truckers communicate directly with our operators. They drop a ticket in a box while we process that ticket while they're dumping. And then we put it out on a pegboard for when they leave. So what was a bit of a 15-minute chit chat has turned into almost no time and zero contact which we will definitely maintain going forward. We implemented online ordering. So for the first time ever, we get people ordering off hours. We see the orders come in at nights and weekends. And so they can just pay for product. And then we have an aisleway where they roll up and we've got their order and we know what their truck or their trailer looks like, and they can just get loaded up, never leave their truck, and leave. And so that's something, ironically, we look back at our 2020 goals, and that was on our goal list starting in January to have a contactless pickup system. And when COVID hit, it really fast forwarded all that. So we love that. We're working on adding online ordering for delivery as well. It's something that we wanted. And then I'd say going forward, residential commercial tonnage, I guess we're not super worried one way or another about that. That'll kind of go up and down. The part that I do wonder about is we've seen record product sales, and just both the data and anecdotally from people coming in saying, I've never had a garden, I want to make a garden, or I'm cleaning up my yard. This year has seemed great, and we're thankful for that. I do wonder what's going to happen to 2021 volumes. And so our team is not forecasting anywhere near the product sales that we've had this year, thinking that this was the year for people to build their gardens. And then I'm assuming there'll be a big dip next spring. So we don't expect this to last. But that's about it on the organic side from our perspective.
Thanks, Pierce. Have you experienced any changes in terms of contamination or other materials that maybe have been cause for concern related to COVID-19?
Nothing to speak of. I mean, commercial has a much higher percentage of contamination in it. And so when that commercial shut off overnight, we saw, due to the feedstock component, that contamination piece went down, and actually you could see the line across our facility. So our facility is a flow through, and it all starts at one end on the east and it ends on the west end, and you could see that line of commercial food travel across the site. And I remember our screener operators saying thanks when 90 days later that material had kind of pushed through and was done going through that section of the site. Excuse me, not 90 days, but the 30 days when it goes through the first part of the pad. So other than the feedstock mix, we can't say that the residential has higher or lower. It's all about the same.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like you guys have implemented some really exciting new changes there. Maybe we'll have to come back out when this is all over and do another tour at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Oh, and you had some slides there, Louis, and I'm so sorry I didn't advance through them, but they're available in the presentation if you guys want to go back and look at those. Colin Staub is our next speaker, and he is with Resource Recycling, and he's going to give us a bigger look at the bigger picture of what's been happening nationally. And so, Colin, it looks like you should be unmuted and ready to go.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone for tuning in and staying until now. I know I'm definitely looking forward to when we can go back to events in person again after we're through this, but for now, here we are. So I'm going to give a few details about what we're seeing nationally and in the markets. I guess to give a little background, when the virus first started coming into the public eye kind of early this year, from a recycling industry perspective, we were looking at it as another hurdle in the global marketplace. It shut down China pretty quickly and pretty intensely and led to significant shipping problems. So it was basically another global market issue, but that evolved as the virus spread. The international shipping impact is still there, even more so than it was, but obviously, by early March, mid-March, it was clear this is going to have an impact on life throughout the US. Maybe not quite as widespread as it has become, but it was pretty obvious. The hit to recycling really started in mid-March when the stay-at-home orders started coming down the line nationwide, and it became clear that certain businesses would have to close while others could maintain operations with new safety protocols. So first on this slide, recycling in one way or another was deemed essential in basically all states, meaning recycling facilities have not been subject to shutdown orders. That was a pretty big point for MRFs and other facilities, particularly in states where the stay-at-home orders have been stricter than they are in Oregon. But despite that, we have seen a number of recycling facility and program closures and suspensions. These were initially sort of a scattered list of drop-off programs facing staffing shortages, or they were, concerned about social distancing at their facilities. But a good deal of curbside program suspensions started coming down the line also in larger and larger cities. We've tallied, there's a number of publications have been tallying this, but we tallied there were more than 60 curbside programs around the country that had suspended service or collected recyclables, but were landfilling them temporarily. Again, different reasons, staffing problems, but also there were early concerns over the potential for the virus to spread via material surfaces, such as, you bring recyclables into a MRF and potentially spread the virus that way. I think more recently we're seeing experts say the risk of transmission that way is pretty low. The CDC has issued guidance specific to waste and recycling workers now, basically giving the same recommendations it does for every sector, more cleaning, distancing in facilities, that kind of thing. I guess notably for this webinar, I don't know of any curbside program suspensions that have taken place in Oregon. I think there have been some drop-off facilities that have closed service to the public, but they're continuing to process curbside material. And as Joel mentioned, another big impact has been on deposit programs. This has definitely varied around the country, but most states with deposit programs have done some form of what Oregon did, which is to suspend requirements for retailers to take back containers. Standalone redemption centers are still open in many states, but volumes are down significantly, and not everyone is as fortunate as we are in Oregon to have the green bag drop program. So it's definitely suffered in some states. Michigan, there's literally no redemption occurring anywhere because the service was specifically called out as non-essential in their executive order. And I recently read there's 70 million deposit containers per week piling up there without any option for redemption. So that will be interesting when that reopens to see what happens. Returns are also down 40% in California due to that state's suspension. We're seeing some moves back towards reopening, as Joel also mentioned, outside Oregon. In Connecticut, they're going to start enforcing the requirement for stores to take back containers on a phased-in basis starting, I think, tomorrow, and they will resume full enforcement early next month. So a little bit moving back towards normal. Next slide, please, Amy. So although facilities, they were allowed to stay open, they had to consider new safety changes. Although some MRF operators I've spoken with say that recycling facilities are actually pretty fortunate in that they're largely set up to handle something like this already. Employees, they're wearing a variety of personal protective equipment in their day-to-day jobs as is. In some cases, they're already stationed 6 feet or more apart on the sorting line, that kind of thing. Mostly I heard about rearranging break rooms and staggering schedules just to have fewer people coming into contact at once. And so back to the material handling side of it, there were definitely some concerns about this, and I think this led to a lot of the program suspensions early on. But there was a study, I guess, in the first weeks of this that said it could live on certain surfaces for hours or days, including plastic. But the consensus now seems to be this is pretty unlikely a way to spread the virus. However, still, if you're handling these materials, wash your hands. If you're sick, don't recycle for the period of time that you are infected, that kind of thing. So downstream impacts have been pretty wild in the past few weeks. We've seen significant shifts in recycled commodity pricing since this began. I guess most notably has been the recovered fiber market, which has climbed higher and higher in the past few weeks. OCC was hovering around $30 a ton for the latter half of 2019, I'd say, and up until the beginning of this year. Now it is skyrocketed to $107 per ton as of this week nationally. Most of that has come since March alone. And why is that? There is, a huge source of clean, high quality OCC comes from the commercial business sector. Retail stores are receiving large shipments, food service businesses, all of those were more or less shut down after mid-March, so that supply evaporated. Grocery stores definitely saw higher demand from panic buying and more traffic, and that translated to more OCC generation, but definitely not enough to offset the other commercial losses. Meanwhile, although in the residential sector, people are ordering more things instead of going out to buy them. So e-commerce has increased, but the quality of the OCC in the residential stream is definitely not the same as the commercial. And maybe more importantly right now, the recovery rate is much lower in the residential stream. So even if all of that OCC shifted kind of neatly from commercial to residential, it would still be a problem because of the recovery rates. And then also, another grade that's been hit pretty hard is sorted office paper. Offices are basically all closed, as I can attest to. This clean high grade stream just not being recovered right now. Interesting statistic I just heard recently is that US recovered paper collection is estimated to be down by as much as 30 to 50% in the second half of March and all of April. So that's a pretty huge impact. And at the same time that supply has been stifled, the demand for these materials has increased pretty remarkably. Mills are producing more packaging and other paper products. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the toilet paper panic buying we've seen, and the recovered paper feedstock that goes into those things became more important than ever right when the supply was on the downslide. So these factors drove kind of that huge price increase, which has definitely been welcome news for recycling operators, MRF operators who have lived through the past few years of the OCC and mixed paper market. That's kind of another component of this. It comes after such turbulence from the Asian markets and China National Sword that it's kind of adding on to that. Plastics have also seen some market impacts. Definitely the end markets for recovered material. The automotive sector is basically shut down. They use a good amount of recycled plastic. I've heard that material displaced from that market has gone toward meeting the increased demand for plastic packaging. So definitely some shuffling there. And on plastics, I think a wider issue, not to get off topic, but is actually kind of unrelated to the coronavirus, and that's the oil market. The oil prices have tumbled, and there's the production cut dispute between Russia and OPEC. Oil trading for negative values at one point. So companies would be paying people to take their product. Long story short, virgin plastic prices are going to be low for the foreseeable future due to these factors. That's going to be a big challenge for recycled plastic prices, even coronavirus aside. So I think I'll move on to the next slide. And this is kind of there's a lot of unknowns right now. I know I've definitely felt like one of the people in this photo when reading about this pandemic from time to time. And for a lot of those unknowns, all we can really do is pose the questions. What does end user demand look like in the coming months? Right now, certain sectors are seeing a big boost, but when that slows down, what's going to happen then? We may be in for a big recession, depending on which analysts you read after this initial impact. If that happens, that probably does not bode well for recycled material demand. And along the same lines of the economic hit, one of the big questions nationwide is how local governments are going to move forward with the huge tax revenue decrease caused by COVID. We're already seeing cities weighing recycling and other services amid big budget shortfalls. Will they elect to cut recycling over other services? I think it probably really depends on the community, but it'll be a definite consideration in the coming months and years. I think that impact, I think, is going to last years. And then also sustainability is taking a bit of a hit during this whole crisis. We're seeing single-use product bans reversed temporarily. The plastic bag bans have been overturned. Kind of a number of communities have done that around the country in the interest of preventing COVID-19 spread. The basic idea, I guess, is that reusable bags can harbor germs and potentially spread the virus. We've seen some stores in Oregon stop allowing reusable bags inside temporarily. And California actually suspended its statewide bag ban and recycled content mandate for 60 days. Unclear exactly how that's going to impact the recycled plastic market, but it's definitely significant. And seeing Oregon and California sort of suspending these things temporarily is pretty remarkable. And then going back to the plastic markets a little bit, we're going to see, I think, brand owners tested in terms of whether they will continue to meet or strive for sustainability goals with this much cheaper option on the table in the long term, and even in the short term, kind of the increased demand from panic buying, as I was mentioning. They kind of have to get stuff out as fast as they can, and if recycled material is higher price, I don't know. It's just going to be interesting to see how that plays out. There have been a lot of recent commitments use recycled resin, and so we'll just have to see if those continue or if this kind of puts a pause on that. And I guess not to be completely negative, but you know, this has been used as an opportunity to double down on the importance of recycling. The EPA, I don't know if anyone saw it, but the EPA last week put out a public-facing statement about kind of explaining how recycling is connected with supply in the manufacturing industry. And in some communities, we're seeing public outcry even when recycling is limited and considered for cuts. So although there are a lot of challenges, it's also sort of shining a light on recycling for people who maybe didn't think about it before. You know, when your stuff stops getting picked up at the curb or you can't drop it off, you miss that service all the more. So final slide, Amy. I think I'll just end by saying kind of the common refrain I hear all the time when these days asking about the impacts of coronavirus, and that's that everything basically depends on how long this lasts and what the new normal looks like afterward. With those two unknowns, it's pretty hard to predict where we're going, but I guess I hope I've given a picture of what we're seeing so far, and I would just ask anyone to get in touch with any tips on what's going on or any questions on what I've spoken about here. So thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Colin. I do have a question that's come in for you. It looks like it just got bumped up in the queue, so I need to go back and find it here, but it was related to the commodity pricing of mixed paper. Do you have any data or information about how that has changed?
Yeah, mixed paper has actually, it's up as well. It certainly hasn't been as dramatic as OCC. I think mixed paper, we do a monthly pricing report on our website. I think it was $10 or $15 a ton nationally, which might not be much, but you know, it's better than negative values, which is what we've been seeing for the past year or more. And mixed paper is interesting. It's because OCC is so highly priced now. I've heard in some of the earnings reports of the big mills that they are looking for ways to take advantage of mixed paper as a low-cost feedstock during this period. Kind of, you know, reminds me of right after the China issues began and mixed paper dropped so much. Basically, the pricing incentive there is it's there, so maybe they can take advantage of this feedstock, which that's great for recycling programs and mills alike. So hopefully that answers that.
That's great. I had a bunch of questions for you, Colin, but you were so thorough. You actually addressed them. I was curious about the, you know, increased use of single-use packaging and sort of the impacts on that. So, but I think you've covered that. So we have had some other bigger general questions come in. We have just a few minutes. And so I'm going to pose these to the group. And if someone has an answer that they'd like to provide, please, you know, chime in. And so one of the questions that has come in regarding messaging just around worker safety, but also, you know, I would say to communities just in general, for the non-English speaking workers and communities, how have you in the hauling industry or in any of the industries been working to address sort of those challenges with communicating to the non-speaking community, non-English speaking communities? Let me just go ahead and I'm going to unmute my speakers here. Anybody have an answer for that? I'm not hearing a taker on that question. Perhaps we can get that addressed after. Let's see. Has any, and this might be a question folks don't want to answer either, but folks are wondering, has anyone actually experienced any positive COVID cases within their workforces? Sounds like nobody's interested in going on record and confirming, but I know that sort of data points have seemed a little bit challenging to get regardless, so maybe we just don't know those answers. And this is another question, perhaps this is a question that we can get answered offline as well is why is COVID or how has COVID impacted the sick leave policies that your businesses and organizations might have had in place? Are you looking to expand sick leave policies, or how have you been trying to accommodate any of those sort of challenges?
Well, this is Sarah at Lane County. I can say that our county agency has implemented several changes to our policies to make it a bit easier. And I have a hard time articulating it because I'm not in, I don't have it memorized, but certain things like people are able to donate some of their sick leave bank to others who need it. People are allowed to, staff are allowed to take unpaid time if they need it, and a couple of other details. So a lot has been spoken of, and many attempts have been put out there to let staff know that the agency will work with them to make sure that they can stay employed, yet take care of their families. If people want to contact me, I can actually find some emails to give more details if you like.
Okay, that sounds good. Sarah, while I have you on as a willing participant to answer questions,
Yeah.
I think you could possibly, I know Lane County in general has a lot of their information in other languages than English. Have you seen an uptick or a need to provide additional information for the non-English speaking workers and communities?
Well, to be actually very honest, our waste management division has been slow on the uptake. We have slowly over the last couple of years started making our signs English and Spanish, and creating our education materials in Spanish. I have not seen any additional need or requesting for information in Spanish. And we have a few staff members that are Spanish speakers. So if on site we come into need of translation, I think what we do is get a hold of one of those staff members and seek that help.
Okay, great. This is a question I think that would apply most likely for you, Sarah, and potentially Josh as well. Thinking about, as commercial accounts, as commercial recycling and garbage has basically plummeted because businesses have been closed, have you seen a lot of requests for changes in those types of accounts? Also on the residential side, are you seeing people looking to upsize their cans or increase or decrease? I mean, are you seeing any of those kinds of changes?
I'll bow out of that because Lane County does no relationship with curbside.
Okay.
I guess that's my cue. No, I'm happy to speak to that, and I think the answer is yes. We have seen a big decrease and changes to commercial accounts during this time, whether it be additional recycling or additional garbage, depending on what they're doing. A lot of businesses have often shut down their operations, but been doing a lot of remodeling and cleanup and so forth. So some customers have increased on certain things and then decreased, a big picture in general. And then related to residential, we haven't seen a lot of increases, but we have had a couple of folks where they've added a cart or a container, or added a frequency on commercial side. But for the most part, it's been decreases. We as a company, like many, have agreed to some practices with the city to continue servicing folks through this. So we have seen quite a large uptick in our bad debt because of that, but we're trying to do the right thing and work with folks through this to keep their business sustainable as much as we can while still giving them some service. So it has been challenging for sure.
Okay. We are just a few minutes over time, and so I want to try to be as respectful to everyone who's still on the call. Really appreciate everyone attending today, and if we have any other questions that were still unanswered, there are a few here that are in the question panel. I'll do my best to try and get some of these answers for you if we can. And look for the recording of today's webinar to be shared early next week. Again, speaker bios are available on the AOR website. I will be sending out a post-webinar survey to everyone. And I also want to thank again all of our presenters and Rogue Disposal and Recycling for sponsoring our webinar, and encourage you that if you're not yet a member of AOR, please consider joining. And